Hello, fishing friends. Welcome to another episode of The Fishing Podcast. I'm your host, Landon DeKaiser, and this is where I interview industry greats, average Joes and Janes, biologists, conservationists, and everything in between. My goal is simple. I want to inspire anglers to catch more fish, more places, more often. All right, I've got Matt Zudweg on today's episode, and he is a professional fly fishing guide here in the state of Michigan on the Muskegon River. He guides for Feenster Guide Service and has been guiding since 2003. So there are many guides and fly fishing guides here in the state of Michigan, but I don't know too many people that focus on Spey rods or two-hand fly rods, big rods designed to catch fish on the swing. And I wanted him to kind of paint a picture of why he likes to use this style of fishing and what it is that makes it so exciting. Matt, outside of fishing, is a phenomenal artist. He makes some really cool apparel. He also does some decorative poppers that are absolutely stunning to look at. Way too beautiful to actually use on the water, in my opinion. But you can check out a lot of that stuff on his website, which is zflyfishing.com. And outside of that, we cover some things like smallmouth fishing. He also does a ton of smallmouth fishing in the summertime on the Muskegon, which is a great smallmouth river. So if you're interested in booking a trip with him, you can also do that on his website there, zflyfishing.com. I'm going to let Matt tell the rest of his story, and I'll stop rambling on. But one quick ask for today, if you haven't already, follow me on Facebook and Instagram. That's where I'm most active, and I love getting messages from you guys and hearing what you think of the show and hearing about your ideas. I can't think of anything else to say, so I'm going to just start this one now. Here we go. How's it going this evening, Matt?
It's going great. It's good to have you here.
Yeah, we have some beautiful weather tonight. It was a little bit of a longer drive up than usual.
Yeah.
Beautiful 28 degrees and rain all day somehow. Just enough to have a nice black ice layer on everything.
That's typical January, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like it has been for many years now. I don't know. I grew up when I was a little kid in the UP, and when I moved down here, the thought of the snow melted at some point was very odd. But shoot, even up there, they don't get the snow like they used to.
Yeah.
So, was it like that down here years ago? Was it snow all the time, or is it?
I've been up here since around 2000, and we've had some really cruddy winters over the years. So this really isn't bad at all. I mean, I like the winter we got going on. If it snows and then melts, that's okay with me.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to get out on the river. Crossing the Grand, especially yesterday, not as much today. There's a lot of ice in the river. Like, too much to definitely be out there in a boat. Yeah. Does the Muskegon get iced over like that at all, or does it stay pretty clear with
it does. When you get down by Bridgeton on a really cold winter, it'll ice even that far up from the lake. But typically the first 25 miles doesn't freeze. It'll get kind of slushy and like a Slurpee in the middle of the winter on a really, really cold day, but not bad. Or you get the inside shelf ice.
Yeah. Do you find fish hold under that shelf ice?
Typically they're on the inside bends, and in the winter when it's, the temperature is really cold, I definitely find them more on the inside bends, but not necessarily under shelf ice, I don't think. I mean, usually the first boat upstream, and it's fun when you are the first boat upstream because your wake is just cracking all that ice and you hear sounds like you've never heard before. It's pretty cool, actually. Yeah.
I've never been out there when it's actually that cold to have ice on the river. Usually I'm ice fishing or small game hunting or something once it gets real cold. But I guess introduce yourself a little bit. Tell folks who you are, where you grew up, how you started fishing, and what you're doing today.
Well, I'm Matt Zudweg. I'm 47 years old, even though I look like I'm only 20. That's what
I
people tell
wouldn't
me
have,
now.
I wouldn't have guessed you're 47,
Yeah,
honestly.
I
So
honestly hear that a lot, so I try to use it to my advantage.
yeah, it's not a bad thing.
No, no. And let's see, I grew up mostly down in Plainwell on the Kalamazoo River.
Okay.
When I was growing up, we were almost right on the river, but the river was so polluted when I was a kid, there was nothing in there.
Right.
So we would just go down there and catch crayfish and stuff like that. My dad was one of those guys that, always had the big sparkly bass boat that went 100 miles an hour. So I grew up bass fishing all of the lakes around Plainwell in the Kalamazoo area and just had a ton of good memories. It was a really good way to grow up.
Yeah.
I've written blogs about this before too, so it's nothing new, but we did not have much money when I was growing up. My dad, whether he had his priorities completely wrong or completely right, always, had a bass boat. There was times when we really didn't have a vehicle to pull it, but the bass boat was a priority in my family. And I don't know that was a great priority, but it made me who I am today. So I'm really thankful for the fact that he did put the priority in having a boat.
Well, money's certainly not everything, and
Mm-hmm.
you're still alive today, so
Yeah, that's true.
you made it. I guess he did his job.
I did make it. So we were always fishing. When I was in my early 20s, met my wife and we got married, and I was very into fishing and very into bow hunting as well at the time. And I don't even remember exactly why it was, but I remember going in a store called the Outdoorsman. It was in Jenison, and I picked up a fly rod for the first time, and something really struck, with me. It's like something rang in my heart, about that fly rod. So
something just felt right.
Yeah, it really did. So my wife ended up buying me that rod and a reel for Christmas, I think it was.
Okay, so I mean, it wasn't until much
I
later
didn't start fly fishing until I was probably 24.
Okay.
I'll bet. I know, hard to believe since I'm only 20 years old now. I guess I can't fall back on that anymore. So, I'm one of those kind of guys that just goes all in when I really am passionate about something. And that's the way it was for me with fly fishing.
Mm-hmm.
Within a week of owning that fly rod, I think I sold, all of my other bass gear just so I could buy more fly fishing equipment.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I'm the kind of guy who just hoards it all and assumes I'm going to use it all someday. And then I look at it and I'm like, man, that tackle box has been sitting there for 4 years. I'll just keep it around a little longer.
Well, being young and newly married, I couldn't afford to keep it all. So if I wanted fly fishing gear, I had to find a way to get it. In fact, one of the things that I did was I did a lot of trading. I was a sign maker at the time, and still do a lot of that. But at the time, I traded signs to fly shops, for equipment, and that was a really good way to get the gear I needed without taking money out of our family funds.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you're still making signs today, so obviously you're a guide, and we're getting to that. But and I mean, you make some T-shirts, some hats, and so you kind of have multiple sources of income.
I've got a lot of different sources of income. Guiding has definitely become my main source of income and probably has been since around 2008.
Okay.
And that kind of coincides with the economy crashing. At the time, I had a really great sign business. I was doing really well financially, doing really well business-wise. I was being published in magazines, and it seemed like I was riding this, wave of success.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. But I was also like, in probably around 2004 or so, I was really starting to get burned out. So I bought a high drift boat and started guiding. And really, it was just to get out of the studio. At the time, I probably had 6 months to a year's worth of sign work ahead of me all the time.
Okay.
And I really felt the stress and the pressure of that all the time. So guiding, which is something I did a little bit, when I was younger, I felt like I could get into that and that would kind of give me a break away from the studio. And so I started guiding. I think it was 2003 actually. And it was just a nice break from the studio. I probably was doing, 30 to 50 days a year, something like that. And then when the economy crashed in 2008, 2009, so did my sign business. All my work was art-based. It was all for interior restaurant decor, stuff like that. And restaurants at that time were really feeling the hurt from the economy. So they started, or they stopped buying.
Stop going out to eat.
Yeah, they stopped buying my work, and eventually my main accounts went bankrupt. And so, thank God they had sort of paid me off. Otherwise, I would have had to go bankrupt at the same time. But, and we did suffer some pretty hard financial times as a result of that. But at that point, I still saw growth in guiding. So I became full-time guide at that point. And that's about the time that I hooked up with Feenstra Guide Service.
Okay.
Actually, it was a little bit before that, but Feenstra Guide Service has definitely played a huge part in my guiding career.
So, I mean, in a way, it kind of sounds like the economy crashing and your business following the lead there was almost a blessing. Would you say that, or
I would say that,
or is guiding not all it's cracked up to be, and it wears you out as well?
It does wear you out. Everybody that hears you're a fishing guide is like, "Oh, you're living the dream. It must be so awesome."
Right.
And a lot of times it is awesome. I mean, I really love it. I truly do. And there's so many aspects I do love about it. But we have our bad days too.
Mm-hmm.
We were just talking before we started recording about what a tough fall it was for Steelhead. There was a lot of days last fall that I came home and did not want to go back out the next day.
Yeah.
But, we all have our bad days.
For sure. I mean, I would argue, in my mind, I don't spend, more than 2, maybe 3 days on the river if I'm lucky. Not this time of year with how much daylight we have, but I always feel like, I'd like to be out there every single day, but especially if you're doing winter steelhead trips, man, it's been cold since beginning of November, like winter cold.
Yeah, and that's another thing for me. I've had what they call Raynaud's syndrome in my fingers since I was 13 and got frostbite. And what that is just hypersensitivity to the cold.
Okay.
Like your fingers shut off the circulation and turn white, and it can be really dangerous. So, if you see me out on the river and it's, below 40 degrees, you'll see that I have mittens on. And I'm probably the only guy wearing mittens when it's 40 degrees. But for me to make a career as a steelhead guide probably wouldn't be advisable by a doctor's standpoint, but I'm doing it anyways.
Like my brother thinks he has that too, because he has trouble with his hands and his feet just getting real cold real fast.
Yeah.
So when you first started, where we're getting to is the fishing with the Spey rods is really what I want to dive deeper into. But did you start with that right off the bat? Were you all fly fishing off the bat? What was the story there?
I was all fly fishing right off the bat, just because my passion for fly fishing was very strong at that point. I did not start off with Spey rods. In fact, that's a story I tell all the time. While we're in the boat throughout the day. I honestly, the first couple years I was guiding, had no interest at all in steelhead. I only was interested in trout and smallmouth bass.
Okay.
I still love both of those, especially the smallmouth.
2 of my favorites.
That's kind of my thing too. And the reason I wasn't into steelhead is because everybody was either pulling plugs for them or using spinning rods, which I wasn't interested in, or using the chuck and duck method, with a fly rod, and none of those interested me. I'm kind of one of those people who it's just as important how I catch a fish as catching the fish. And I know some people can't relate to that, and some people totally relate to that. That's, and it's fine for everybody. You just have to go with what's true for yourself. And for me, I really enjoyed the aspect of a pure form of fly fishing, which is why I liked the tapered lines and actually casting. So it wasn't, I don't think, till I was fishing pretty regularly with Kevin Feenstra that I started swinging flies. In fact, before that, a lot of times what I would do is just take a full sinking line, and I would fish by myself a lot, and just set it up just like I was plug fishing in the boat, and slowly drop down through a run with a 400 grain sinking line and a great big, a giant rabbit streamer dangling behind it, and I would catch steelhead that way sometimes, and so that was really fun. Then when I met Kevin, at the time he was starting to get into swinging flies, or had been for a couple years, and he was doing it all with single hand rods, and he was making his own sort of bellies, just out of 12 weight level line, so he could cast T14. And so I started doing that as well, and started running guide trips for Kevin, just kind of the overflow, and it worked really good. In fact, there's some days where I think that worked almost better than a Spey rod. In reality, probably not, but there are some cases where I think that does work better. But it was fun. And for me, it wasn't until probably I had been doing that for 2 or 3 years. I had some clients that I had to pick up at the Amway Grand Hotel that were here for a business meeting from Norway. And so they wanted to use Spey rods. And at the time, I think Kevin had just bought a couple Spey rods. So he let me borrow a couple rods for these guys. And I had never experienced Spey casting much at that point. But these guys actually were pretty avid Spey anglers, being from Norway.
Yeah.
And they were good casters. And I sat in my boat all day and just put them in the right spots and watched them cast. And just watched every single move they made and tried to figure out, why do they do this particular move with the Spey rod and that, and really fell in love with it at that point. So that was a pretty expensive trip for me, because then I had to go buy some Spey rods and and all the stuff. And at the time, the lines that were available for using a Spey rod were pretty cruddy. For what we were doing, throwing 10 to 12 feet of T14 with a single hand rod, there wasn't really great lines for casting that much T14, and it was kind of a struggle for a couple years. But I did take a couple lessons back in the day from Pete Humphreys. He was very helpful in kind of teaching me the basics of Spey casting, and then it was just a matter of spending a lot of time with a Spey rod in my hand. And back in those days, I wasn't guiding as much as I do now, so I had days where I could just get out on the water myself
and actually do some fishing.
Right. Where nowadays I don't get any days off until typically after Christmas.
Gotcha. One thing real quick, could you clarify what T14 is? Because I'm honestly not sure what it is. So
yeah, T14 is just a tungsten coated line. It used to be a tungsten coated monofilament. Now it's usually a braided, but it's tungsten coated, and it's a sinking line. It's all the same level. I think it's 14 grams or 14 grains per foot. I'm pretty sure that's why it's T14, because then they make T17 and T20 and T11.
I was assuming it was a weighted line. I thought that's what it was.
Yep.
But wasn't.
And they make tungsten coated tapered leaders as well, called poly leaders, and I use those a lot for trout fishing, but they're just really not able to sink deep enough for what we need on the Muskegon River.
Yeah.
For other rivers, I mean, out west, I hear guys use them all the time.
How deep of holes can you fish using that style of fishing?
Really depends on water temperature. Early on, when the water's still, 45 degrees or above, you can really get away with fishing a pretty deep hole. Your fly's not going to sink super deep, but the fish will come a long ways for it.
Okay.
So the colder the water gets, the harder it is to get that fly deep enough and slow enough with a swung fly.
That makes sense. So do you find that when it does get cold, are the fish going to be in the deepest holes they can find? Or, will they pick any hole as long as it's, say 10 foot deep or?
Yeah, I don't think it has to be 10 foot deep. A lot of times, like in January, the fish that have been there for a couple weeks are going to be in the deeper holes, let's say over 6 foot deep.
Okay.
But there's always new fish coming in, whether they're just trickling in or coming in more bigger numbers. But the newer fish that come in generally will hold in shallower water until they kind of get acclimated to the water, and then they'll
Figure out
find
where
a
they want
deeper
to be.
spot. Yeah.
Right.
So if you got a good number of fish trickling in through the winter, you can have a really good day swinging, just fishing tail outs and around lumber and rocks and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, you explained a little bit on what you're using, but could you kind of just take us from, the rod to the reel to the whole line on the spool all the way down to the fly, and what a setup looks like?
Sure. When I first started using Spey rods, they were all minimum 14 feet long. And really that was good because the lines were not that great. As the lines have gotten shorter and heavier and fatter, we've been able to go to shorter rods. I typically use a 13-foot rod, an 8-weight. And there's a lot of different lines available. Typically what I'm doing is using the Skagit line. And even with Skagit lines, they really vary in length from, 24, sometimes even 26 feet down to, 16 to 18 feet on some of those really short, like commando heads and stuff. A few years ago, it's probably more like 10 years ago, it was Scientific Anglers came out with an intermediate Skagit line. And so for probably a week or so during the fall, we had all been fishing just floating lines up till that point. So I remember about a week in there where I would purposely have one guy fishing this new blue line that was intermediate and another guy fishing a floating line, and the intermediate line would outfish the floating line every time. So now I generally stick with an intermediate Skagit head from the line standpoint.
Okay.
And that just means it's going to sink a little bit.
Yeah, it's not like a full weighted sinking line, but
no, it's just it's in between a floating and a sinking, which is why they call it an intermediate. But and it was hard to figure out, honestly, for me, why it fished so much better at first, because you can get just as deep, I think, with a floating line by putting more T14 on it. But I think what I really figured out is that the intermediate line gets just a little bit below the surface, and you get below that really fast surface speed, and that's why that's why it fishes better, because you get a slower swing.
Yeah, instead of the line getting pulled with that surface water that's churning.
I mean, you
over.
can generally mend it, once right when you cast, which honestly is why I didn't like it at first. It was I had been used to mending and being able to control it really well.
Yeah.
But even with just mending once, it does fish better on my home river anyways. So intermediate Skagit's my go-to 13-foot 8-weight rod, and a reel with a good drag, because when you get hit on a swung fly, especially in the warmer water temperatures, it can be a very hard hit. But that's one of the things we love about it. It's so fun. I mean, you can tell I get a smile on my face just talking about the hit. It's just it's pretty awesome.
I've never experienced it, and most of my steelhead fishing is float fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get a very hard hit. A lot of times your float just kind of tucks under the water, and you can't tell if it's a big fish or a 6-inch brown.
Right. So
that would be a ton of fun, because I know what it's like to catch. I caught my biggest brown the other day on a streamer, which is 18 inches.
Nice.
So it wasn't a monster, but even with that, it really smacked it pretty good.
Heck yeah, that's a good fish. And it's basically that same thing. It's an aggressive strike. I think steelhead that tend to take a swung fly are more aggressive fish. They're taking it more like I want to kill that thing, rather than, oh, that looks like food, I'm going to eat it. Mm-hmm. And it's really a lot like the plug fisherman. If I wasn't so stuck on fly fishing, I would be a plug fisherman, because you get that same kill it hit.
Right.
But I wouldn't stick the rod in a rod holder. I'd have clients hang on to the rod just because that's what does it for me. There's aspects of fishing, for everybody that really is, there's things that they can see, well, that really does it for me. That's what draws me into this particular style of fishing. And for me, it's really the take.
Yeah.
The take is, and that's it with me for any fly fishing, whether it's smallmouth bass or trout.
Smallmouth, that's one of the reasons I love them so much. Is I grew up doing a lot of smallmouth fishing. I really didn't start trout fishing till more recently, but you can't beat smallmouth when it comes to just clobbering whatever you put in front of them. Usually it's an aggressive hit.
Yeah.
So you do a lot of smallmouth trips, right? In the summer?
I do. I love smallmouth bass. And that's what I grew up doing. We would go to Tennessee smallmouth bass fishing in Kentucky Lake and all those places. And that's where I really fell in love with the smallmouth bass.
Yeah, they're awesome fish. Now, do you still do any trout, like specifically browns or?
Yeah. It's funny. My trips have changed over the years quite a bit. The first couple years, I just did a lot of nymphing trips for trout, and then I just decided I just didn't enjoy the nymphing stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It just wasn't for me. So then I started swinging wet flies, which I discovered I really liked that. And to this day, most of my trout trips are wet fly trips. But back when Kelly Gallup came out with his book, Modern Streamers for Trophy Trout, I think it was called.
I've seen it, but I've never read
Everybody wanted to do streamer trips. So I ran a lot of streamer trips back then. And it was great because I really kind of was a streamer junkie at that time too. And I still do love streamer trips, although as I get older, it gets harder to, be on the sticks the entire day. But that is what I'm doing for bass too, but we're just fishing different water. We're fishing slower water. Yeah.
Right. So are you doing all your trout trips in the Muskegon?
Yeah. Everything I do from a guiding standpoint is on the Muskegon.
Is it, does it stay decent for trout throughout the summer, or is it?
It depends on the summer. Typically I would say no. You really have May and June that are good months for swinging wet flies.
Mm-hmm.
So really, May and June are about the only months that I really focus on trout trips. And honestly, the last few years, even by mid-June, I'm switching over to smallmouth bass. Yeah. As soon as that water gets 69, 70 degrees, I just leave the trout alone and just switch to bass at that point.
Yeah, I mean, even if they're there, it's tough on them. Mm-hmm. Do you think that they are there, or do a lot of fish push out into the lake or tributaries? Or
in the Muskegon, there's so many springs, so many cold places for those trout to go and just go into survival mode during the hot weather that most of them do survive. I don't think there's really a big issue there. I'd love to see the water, I'd love to see steps taken where they could keep the water colder so our trout population would really thrive. I don't think it thrives right now, but I think they hold their own.
I'm trying to remember if I was talking with somebody, or I talk to so many people and read so many things, I can't remember where I hear things sometimes, but they were talking about the Muskegon and how some people have an opinion that it could be like one of the best brown trout fisheries in the world. Like it could be like the White River down in Arkansas. And the main difference, because when you compare the two bodies of water, they're similar.
Yeah.
But the main difference is how the water feeds out of the dam.
Right.
And because it feeds out of the top of the lake, right? Which keeps the water
out of
warmer.
Croton Dam, it does. In fact, it's not it could, how do I want to put this? They've got a turbine side, and it's not very deep. I'm not sure exactly what the depth is, maybe 30, 40 feet, something like that. So they're not getting really cold water during the summer. But from what I've heard, the guys running the dam are trying to keep from having to put new seals on the turbines when the water gets low. So the last couple summers, they've spent a lot of the summer running the water over the spillway side in order to maintain the turbine side better. But that's just dumping all that hot water right into the river.
Right.
And so that is pretty tough on our trout. And it's tough for people that want to trout fish in July and August. I definitely wouldn't recommend that. There's plenty of guys that do it, but it's really hard on those trout.
Yeah.
And it's hot water coming over. I mean, you think 90-degree days like we had this last summer and having
low water
spill gates
conditions
open. That is
too.
It's really hot water. From a bass fishing standpoint, it makes the bass fishing amazing, really good, but it's really tough on those trout.
This is just from my own observations, but I mean, it seems like when I go smallie fishing, I fish on the Grand a lot for smallmouth, and I think it just almost gets better as the day gets hotter and the sun comes up. Like you catch fish in the morning and the evenings, but it always seems to me like right in the middle of the hottest part of the day, I catch the most fish. Do you find that? Yeah,
I experienced that on the Muskegon quite often as well. I mean, sometimes, I try to get away from the tubers as much as possible during the summer.
Is that even possible?
It is possible. It's not easy, but it is possible. I have a captain's license, which allows me to go pretty much anywhere on the river, and that's a big help from a guiding standpoint.
Like a U.S. Coast Guard captain's license.
Yeah.
Do you have to have one on?
You have to have one if you're going to guide below Newaygo.
Okay.
It's considered navigable by the Coast Guard to that point. But
that probably was set in place many years ago.
Long time. But, back when the dam was still there.
And there used to be a dam right down in Newaygo.
Right in Newaygo, yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, because I think like the Grand is the same way up to 6th Street or something.
Yeah. In reality, it's not navigable. I mean, I can't get my boat from here all the way to Muskegon Lake.
Oh, no kidding?
No, the river breaks off into, little braids, and there's trees over the river everywhere. Even in a kayak, you would have to portage a lot.
That's interesting how much rivers can change and just go through different stretches of landscape that just completely change them.
Right.
Or even how they'll get warm and then cool off and then get warm again in certain areas. It's interesting for sure. How many trips a year are you doing?
I don't generally count, but I'm probably on average 160, 170, somewhere in there. I would bet.
Yeah, that's a lot of days on the water.
Yeah. And the bulk of that, is October 1st through Christmas, and then, mid-March through mid-May. In some summers, I keep busy 3-4 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week. But some summers, this last summer, I was actually pretty slow. And I think a lot of that had to do with it being so hot. A lot of guys just didn't even want to go out. And the economy's been doing really good, and I think that plays into it a little bit.
Negatively or positively?
Positively for people not going fishing, if that makes sense. I mean, negative for me, but people are so busy with work, it seems like. I definitely have a lot of clients that are regular bass clients that just couldn't get off work this last summer. And honestly, this last summer, I was so busy with a porch project at my house that it didn't bother me at all. But ironically, it was amazingly good fishing last summer when I had, very few trips. But I've
people missed out.
Yeah, they did. Some summers, in the last 5-6 years, though, I've guided a lot of trips. So I don't know, it's really dependent on the summer. I mean, whereas Steelhead, I can count on being busy every day, all fall and spring. Smallmouth, it really varies a lot. I can be swamped, or I can, have plenty of days off.
So I think I told you I picked up a drift boat about a month and a half ago, and I'm planning to get my guide license, not because I'm planning on becoming a guide full time.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Well, who knows? Maybe it will change, but that's not the intent. I'd like to, donate trips and have insurance and just have everything be legal. Do you have any recommendations for myself or maybe anybody that's listening that are thinking about getting into it?
Yeah, I feel like honestly I did it really wrong. I probably should have just started right off seeking the help of another guide service, an existing guide service, and getting plugged into them rather than starting my own guide business and really struggling for the first couple years because it was a real struggle for the first few years that I was guiding.
You started, you said 2008?
2003 is when I really
Okay.
started guiding.
So you didn't really have the advantage of social media.
I didn't, not really, no.
How did you find clients back then, and how does that work now?
I did have a website at the time. I think my website was troutguide.com. And I did.
Do you still own that?
I think I let that one slide a while ago.
It's probably worth money now.
I don't think I still own that one. But it was a good name to have, and I think a name in any business is a good first start.
It's important.
Being in kind of the advertising business too, I know the value of having a good name. I had that website, and I did some advertising, here and there in magazines and stuff like that, and got what I needed. I didn't need a lot of trips. At the beginning, it wasn't about the money at all. It was just about needing a break from my studio.
Yeah.
And it really was a great way to start out for me. But if somebody just needs to make money, like, get a job guiding, that would be a really tough route to go.
Yeah, super hard.
Probably easier today with all the social media, but still, I think it would be tough.
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend getting plugged into an existing guide service, a reputable guide service, that can help you along. For me, I figured, growing up fishing, and I thought of myself as a good angler. I figured I would immediately be a good guide, but honestly, that wasn't the case. I don't think I was a very good guide for the first couple years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know plenty of good anglers that definitely wouldn't make good guides.
Yeah.
Maybe myself included, but not that I'm a phenomenal angler. I'm kind of a jack of all trades and a master of none. But what would you say it does take to be a good guide? Patient?
Oh, patience is a huge one, from a guiding standpoint. Really being a people-oriented person, really being aware of what your clients are thinking and feeling and what they want to do, even if they're not saying it. I think that helps out. I mean, it helps greatly, obviously, to know how to fish, to know where the fish are, on any given water level or temperature or whatever. Obviously, you have to know how to fish, but there's so much more that goes into it than just being able to fish. It's a lot different being able to put clients who often are not going to be as good as angler as the guide is. Getting those people on fish is totally different than you getting on fish yourself.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, you can be in the right place at the right time using the same thing as somebody else and not catching any fish. Yeah. I've been on both ends of that before. So
we all have.
Well, when I went out with you, I think I've talked about this several times on the podcast. My buddy Jacob, I think we landed like 5 steelhead after you told us it probably wasn't going to be very good. And he landed all of them.
I started you off with low expectations. Another guide trick.
Yeah. Well, keep people from getting disappointed that way.
Yeah.
So, where can people find your information at if they want to book a trip with you?
My website right now is Z Fly Fishing, just the letter Z followed by flyfishing.com. And I also guide full-time for Feenstra Guide Service. I mean, everything that's booked, whether it's through me directly or through Feenstra Guide Service, it all runs through Feenstra Guide Service.
Okay.
I'm 100% devoted to Feenstra Guide Service. FeenstraGuideService.com, FeenstraOutdoors.com, or ZFlyFishing.com.
Now, if they go to your website, though, they're going to find some other cool things.
They're going to find a lot more of the stuff that I do, whether it be, fine art or T-shirts or stickers or fly tying tutorials. I've got a little bit of everything that I do. And, I've really built my business around stuff that I enjoy and that I'm passionate about. As much as I, agree that a good business standpoint would be catering to the needs or wants of other people. I've honestly just catered to the needs and wants of myself, as selfish as that sounds. And if I think something's cool, I'll do it and then offer it in case anybody else wants it as well. And I've really, really been blessed and fortunate to be able to make a living in this business, or even in business by myself for so long, whether it's as a sign maker or as a fly fishing guide. Really feel fortunate.
Yeah, I mean your artwork's cool, and some of it's pretty quirky, funny.
Yeah,
you have some funny graphics. What was the one you posted the other day? The Jeep one.
The Jeep one. I recently bought my first Jeep, so I decided to post build a Jeep sticker. I think it says stop wasting. Stop wasteful government spending on paved roads, and it's got a picture of a Jeep.
That's
on it.
right.
Yeah, I've been a Toyota guy since I was just a kid, so really this is my first step away from Toyota to a different brand. But I'm honestly really liking my Jeep.
Yeah, those, like the ones that you have, the new ones, because that's like basically more of an SUV than the old Jeeps were. Those are really neat. They have a little bit more room in.
Yeah, I got the 4-door JK Unlimited, and I really got it just because I needed something that could fit clients comfortably in, and that seems to do a good job.
Yeah. What boat are you running now? I remember you had a couple boats and you were selling one.
Yeah, for the last couple years, I've had a Stealthcraft 18-foot power drifter. So it's got a jet on the back, the 4060 jet, and I honestly am absolutely in love with that boat.
Those are so nice.
This spring, I had them build me a brand new one, exactly the same boat, and I guided out of it all spring. I'm not sure if you were with me in it or not. It was a black one, and
I'd have to. Yeah, I can't remember which one.
I don't remember either, but I guided out of it, for a month or so. And every day I would sit in the boat and say, I kind of like this one little thing about my other boat better, which is also, it's the same boat. It's just tiny little changes that I've made to it or that Stealthcraft did to it. And so after like 30 days of nitpicking it, I eventually said, well, I'm just going to sell the new one and keep the old one. So that's what I did. But it's a fantastic boat. I love it.
Were you, what'd you get another boat for anyways, if you had, because the other one wasn't old by any
It wasn't old. I do a lot of work with Stealthcraft, and I'm on their pro staff, and they treat me really well. So it makes sense to get into a new boat every couple years.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I've been doing. I've gone through probably 4 or 5 of them by now and loved every one of them. But this particular boat that I still have is the 2016 Power Drifter, and I've just been so happy with it, and it's held up so well. If I spray it down with Fantastic and power wash it, it looks brand new still.
Yeah.
Even after 500 guide trips. So
yeah, I love their boats. I've been in a bunch of different ones now, and my boat is actually a Stealthcraft, but it's an old Stealthcraft.
So you probably got like the wood gunnels and stuff like that.
It's a 99. So it is now 20 years old. But I mean, for a 20-year-old boat, it's in decent shape. It doesn't leak. It goes down the river. It actually handles extremely well, especially on the PM and smaller rivers like that. You can turn it on a dime and stop it on a dime. Yeah. So
I think they've got a great product.
Yeah. Michigan-based company. I think mine was actually the boat that they, before the current owner, it was the previous owner. I think that started
Jim
something.
Johnson.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Jim was involved in the beginning. It's Mike Batke who owns it, though.
You're right. Yep. Yeah. What do you have any new exciting things coming up next year that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. Honestly, I'm just kind of plugging away, doing the same thing. Usually in the winter months, I do a lot of tying gigs, but I've really backed out on those this winter and said no to just about everyone. Just I get
like where you go to a shop
stuff,
and
where I'll go
classes.
to Cabela's and do a tying for a day, or a fly shop, or one of the bar flies things or something like that. I've just kind of feeling burned out on that for whatever reason. So, and being a self-employed person, I can take them or leave them.
Right.
And that's the advantage of that. I know it's better for business if I take them, but I also got to be, true to myself. I know I can get burned out. I've gotten burned out on things in the past, and I definitely don't want to get burned out on fly fishing or guiding or tying or anything like that. So I have to know my limits.
Absolutely. But you've got a bunch of stuff here you're working on for yourself. Do you tie most of your own flies, or?
Yeah, I do have a friend of mine that has tied some stuff for me for my spring trips before, just because, I do run still a handful of chuck and duck trips in the spring when the water's high, and nothing eats through flies like chuck and duck trips.
Oh, yeah.
So it's hard to keep up with that. If you get done guiding, you get home, and the last thing you feel like doing at that point is tying a couple dozen more flies for tomorrow. So, but I'm pretty much back to tying all my own spring flies at this point because my buddy doesn't have time anymore. But all of my swung fly stuff, all my bass and trout stuff, I tie myself.
Okay.
And I really enjoy tying that stuff especially. I don't enjoy tying egg flies. You can see on my desk there's egg yarn everywhere because I got to fill my egg box. Those are my least favorite in the world to tie. I'm trying to get my kids to do it for me, but it's not been successful so far. So I'm stuck tying them.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what you like to use for smallmouth in terms of flies. I've done a little bit of it, and it's definitely a ton of fun. Catch them on top waters. I think I've caught some on some streamers even. But what are you generally chasing them with out there?
I think I've almost not on purpose, but I kind of have become known for poppers. A few years back, I came out with a popper called the Zudbubbler, and that became really popular. Hairline sells the popper bodies for making them, and we have a special tool for pulling the legs through foam bodies and stuff like that. So everybody thinks of me as a popper guy, and that's very true. I mean, I love poppers. If I have a choice and I think they're going to bite on a popper, we're throwing a popper.
Back to catching them the way you want to.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, top water in general.
There's nothing
doesn't matter
like
what you're
a
fishing
smallmouth
for.
take on a popper. I mean, I wish we could catch steelhead that way.
Yeah.
But and it's funny because I had a lot of clients for a long time that would come, with me, and let's say the popper bite was not great that day. I'd say, well, let's try streamers for a little while. And I can't even tell you how many people would say, oh, no, we're throwing poppers. We came with you because we want to throw poppers.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, well, that's fine. But I do a lot of streamer stuff as well. Like I said before, it's all about the take for me.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're fishing a streamer, we're fishing it just below the surface because I want to see the fish take it. And maybe that's selfish and probably is pretty selfish because, if it's not fun for me, then I'm not going to want to do it. So
right.
It's just as exciting for me having somebody else in my boat catching fish that way as it is if I'm throwing it myself. So poppers and streamers are the thing for me.
That's a question I actually meant to ask you. I think when we were steelhead fishing, you said you couldn't remember the last steelhead you caught.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seriously not caught a steelhead in years?
Well, that's kind of a tough question because I have caught steelhead myself. Usually if I get a cancellation or something like that, I'll go fish myself and get one on the swing just because I love it so much. But I don't get very many cancellations. And because I'm guiding almost every day, October 1st through Christmas, when a lot of times if I do get a cancellation, I have so much other stuff that I need to get done.
You're probably
that I'm overwhelmed. And usually I work harder. Yeah. I work harder those days even than when I'm guiding because it's like people are waiting for me for stuff. So I don't get to fish very much. Now, if you're going to say, do you hook steelhead once in a while? That's a different story because a lot of times a client, will be like, well, I'm going to take a break for a few minutes and eat my lunch or or have a snack or whatever, and you want to take the rod and throw a few, and I'll always oblige to that. And I've hooked a lot of steelhead over the years doing that, but I always hand the rod off to the client unless they're like, no, you got to land it, which does happen once in a while. But most of the time I kind of force the client to land it because I want them to have the best day as possible.
What about smallmouth fishing? Do you get to go out and do a little bit more of that?
I definitely do more smallmouth fishing than steelhead, just because I'm not booked 6 days a week all summer long. So I have more opportunities to fish for smallmouth.
Yeah.
Yep. And honestly, during the cold months, when I get a day off, it's beneficial for my hand situation to give them a day to heal up rather than just force it and go out there and make them even worse, because my hands take a pretty serious beating. By Christmas, they're pretty swollen.
Yeah, I don't even have any issues with my hands, and after like 4 days on the river, I mean, they're getting chapped and worn out. And
the weather's tough on your hands.
It is.
Especially if
especially cold, wet weather.
Yeah, it's hard to keep them warm. When you got to slip off your gloves and tie flies on once in a while. And, honestly, that's another reason I love the swung fly stuff. It's down there on my list of why, but, I don't have to change flies all the time swinging flies. Whereas,
keeping them up out of the rocks.
If I'm doing a chugging trip, we're changing flies a lot, and it's tough on the fingers.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm out of questions on that subject, but we might do a whole different one some other time.
Yeah, I'd love
if there's anything else that you've got going on, feel free to plug it in and let people know about it. This is definitely a platform to just get the word out about cool things people are doing as well. So
I really one of the things that's been exciting me the last few years is kind of getting back to my roots of fly tying, and that's building balsa poppers. So if you've seen any of my social media stuff, you've seen some of the decorative balsa poppers that I do. And, and I really enjoy that aspect of tying, because it involves, a little bit of woodworking, a little bit of art, and a little bit of tying, kind of all aspects that keeps me really interested in it.
They're almost too much art for me to... they're too nice looking to feel like I could fish with one of those. And some of them just are art, aren't they? Like you do the larger ones.
Yeah, these giant ones that you see beside me here, those are tied on those are all built on a 12-aught shark hook. Nobody's fishing with those.
No.
Most of them I'm tying as though you could fish them, and they're very fishable. I do have clients that fish them, but I sell them for $50 a piece. So if somebody's going to fish them, they have more guts than I do.
Yeah, I don't got the wallet right now for that.
Most people are using those for display purposes.
Yeah. Like I said, even if I did have the money, I'd almost feel guilty.
Yeah,
putting one on the end of the line.
Once in a while, I'll mess one up a little bit, so it doesn't meet my perfection needs to send somebody. So I'll fish with it.
Right. And you're still doing the sign work, you said, too, so if people...
I still do a little bit of sign work. I have a few commercial accounts that I've had for 20 years that I take care of. Most of my sign business, though, was built around hand-lettered antique-style signs, and that's where I did all of the interior decor work for restaurants and things like that. And I still do... I dabble in that a little bit, but, I've got no interest in going full-time back to that ever again.
I don't really blame you.
Yeah. It's great, but it is great. I love it, but I really just burned myself out on it.
Yeah. If are there any places around Grand Rapids or around town where if someone goes in there, they can say that's some of your work?
Oh, probably. Most of my work over the years was for Max and Irma's restaurants, but I've got signs hanging up in, different bars and restaurants all over the place. And for me to even name one, I don't even know if I could. It's been so long since I've really been doing a lot of that. It's hard to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you letting me come up here and bug you late on a Tuesday night and sit down and tell us about what you do. A lot of interesting stuff. And thanks again.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem.